Working with the character rig requires us to do a couple of things first to make sure that our layers are prepped and ready to go. So we can see that the layers are in a flat hierarchy right now. So what's on top is on top, what's on bottom is the bottom, but we don't have any relationship between the layers. Before we start connecting the layers together, what is important is that we set up the pivot point for each one of the layers. The pivot point is identifiable using the rotate tool from the advanced animation toolbar. If the advanced animation toolbar is not visible, right click up in the top of the camera window and select advanced animation. With the rotation tool active, if I click on a layer, you will see it shows where the pivot point is for that layer. So I can go through each one of the layers. Now the pivot points for these layers have already been set. They were set previously and are mostly in decent places. We can see how the foot is on top of the lower leg, on top of the upper leg. So we do have some layer issues that need to be addressed as we're going to work forward with this. By default, the pivot point for any given layer is going to be the center of the screen, and that's why it needs to be changed, because then when the pivot point determines where a given layer is going to perform its animation transformations from. So as I look at a given layer, so if I look at the upper arm, we can see it's now moving from the shoulder. If I want to change that so it's at a different place, then all I have to do is use the rotate tool from advanced animation. I can click and move that. If it were put out here, we can see how it rotates around that point. So it is going to be very important that you position all of your pivot points to the spot that you need to use for your different layers of artwork. That's step one. Step two is to go into the layers and start building the parent-child relationship. And to do that, what we need to do is start dragging layers. Now, as I go to do this, what I will notice is we have, if I look at the right arm, we have the upper arm, the lower arm, and the hand. If I take a layer and drag it between two layers, we see a blue line show up indicating it's going to move that layer to that order in the stacking order. If I drag a layer to another layer, then it indents and it becomes a child of that. So the hand is now a child of the right lower arm. I can repeat that by dragging now the right lower arm to the upper arm. So we have right arm, right arm, right arm. It's upper lower hand. Same thing with the left arm. I drag that down, and again, left arm, left arm, left arm, upper lower hand. Repeat that with the legs. And drag the foot. Oh, drag then the upper. So it's upper, lower foot, upper, lower foot. Now, we have to do something a little bit different on the face, because if I make these layers a child of the face, so if I take, I'll just grab both eyes and make these a child of the head. Now, when I look at my artwork, I will see that the eyes have disappeared from the face. So it puts them behind. So we need a different solution for dealing with the head. And the solution that we are going to use is a peg. A peg is essentially a null point that we can attach other layers of drawings to, and the peg then will hold all of the animation transformation information of translating XYZ positioning, rotating scale and skew. All of that will become part of that peg layer. So the way to create a peg layer, there's a couple of different ways. With nothing selected, if I click on the add peg, we'll see that it added a peg layer here. It's not attached to anything. It's outside the hierarchy of everything else. Then what I can do is I could now take all of the layers that are part of the head. So I shift-clicked those layers. I can drag those down to the peg, and now they become part of that peg. Now if I click on the peg, we'll see that its rotation point or pivot point is down at the middle of the screen. So using the rotate tool, I drag that up to about where the chin is, because now we can see the whole head is moving. But this whole structure is below everything else, which is why the neck is now on top. Having the peg just named pegged isn't great. We probably want to rename it. I'm going to undo this and demonstrate a different way that we could go about doing it. If I click on the head layer and I add a peg to the head, it renamed it head-p. Convention holds in harmony that peg layers all have their name, the name of the layer, and then do dash and a P indicating it's a peg layer. Now I'm going to grab the facial features, put those down onto, I want them to become adjacent to or siblings to head, but not children of the head. So now, once I move this pivot point up, and I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see there is the head. So now the head moves. So I like how that looks a little bit better. I'm going to, with this, turn off animate. And then I'm going to take this whole structure and just pull it up just a little bit. I want his head a little bit higher. That cleans it up. Now, if you notice, one thing I did for doing this movement is I moved it with animate off because I wanted it to be set. Now, if I leave the running man on, this gives me animate current frame. If I have this, every time I do a movement, it's going to generate a keyframe. So to recap, turn on the advanced animation tools by right-clicking up in the camera window. With the rotate tool, I have set the pivot point for all of my different layers. Now there is one more thing that I would like to add to the mix here, and that is going to be a master peg to control the whole character. So for that, I am going to select so I have no layers selected. And to deselect everything, the easy way is to hit the escape key on the keyboard. So I hit escape, and now nothing is selected. Now I can collapse these different layers because I don't actually need to see all of them. And that gives us a much more manageable layer palette. I'm going to add a new peg here. And this peg, double click to rename it, this will be my master-p. So this is my master peg for the character. A simple shift click selects all of the layers, drag those onto the master peg. Now the master peg is in my timeline, cleaned up, ready to go. I can click right here and see that now I do want to relocate the position for that peg. Now to do that, commonly we'll position a master peg pivot point between the main feet of the character. It makes more sense to be moving from their feet than it does to be, say, positioning this at the center of the character so that they're spinning here. That doesn't seem as logical as a animation control point. So I'm going to leave it down here. So this now gives me frame 1 of my animation. That completes the rigging process. Now to actually work with this animation, we have to do a couple of different things to make it take place. The first step when animating with the character rig is I want to insert a keyframe for every layer, because if I look at all of my layers here, I will see that not every layer has a keyframe on it. Now I could manually go through and highlight everything and then insert the keyframe using the keyboard command F6, or I can click on the Add Keyframe button in the timeline window. That is a way I could do it. Often the easiest way is to collapse on the master peg, and then I click in the first frame, and now I hit F6. Now if I want to start moving and at frame 10 be somewhere else, I'll notice that the artwork doesn't continue. Again, with it collapsed on the master peg, if I simply hit, I'll go out to even the end of my timeline, I can hit F5 on the keyboard. And if I open it back up, you'll see how it added those layers out into time. Now, I can very easily, frame 10, I hit F6, that adds in a keyframe. To work my way through and control the keyframes and to modify positions, of my artwork, I'm going to work with Translate, and we're going to pull this character down a little bit because he's going to be bending his knees. So right now it's sliding down. To figure out how far I want to slide down, I'm going to turn on onion skinning. I'm going to stretch that out so I can see where the beginning was. Now this is where the fun begins. So to select a given layer, I can open this up and go find a given layer. So I could click on the right leg, which is one of the ones I want, and I could do that. Now we can also move through the layers using H and J. So if I hit J on the keyboard, we can see how it moves down the list. Each layer, when it's selected, is highlighted. Layers that are drawing layers highlight with a purple overlay. When I move to a layer that is a peg layer, you will see how it takes on a gold or yellow overlay. So we know that by seeing that color, it clues us in as to what is the active layer. Now I can move down through my list using J, so we can see how it moves through the different hierarchies. So I'll start with this leg here, and now I want to use rotate. And because we built this parent-child relationship, I am able to pull that leg out. Now I can hit J, pull this in, hit J again, bend that leg. So it looks like I might want to pull the character down even a little bit more, because what I want to have happen is I want at this point for the whole character to mostly be standing in place. So we can move it back up just a little bit to find the... Now that I have the first leg done, I'll rotate out the other leg. Again, using the keyboard shortcuts to line things up. Now we can see that this extreme of a bend is starting to break his leg, so I am going to rotate the upper leg up a little bit more, rotate the lower leg. So he's preparing to do something. Very quickly, I can close on the master pose. And this is why it's going to be important to hit F6 when we do this, to insert a keyframe all the way across all the layers, because see how we can see how it inserts that keyframe. If I don't do that, and now at this new point, I'm going to go grab an arm. So that arm moves up here. Now at this point, I go and grab the other arm. That arm moves here. We'll see how the arms are moving over greater amounts of time. And that can be problematic. Now, if I decide at this point I wanted to bend his head, oh, no, for the head we want the peg, so I have to go back and grab the peg here. And because I didn't have an intermediate, as I think about from each pose, we can now see from frame 10, the head is doing its animation across the whole of that, so it's slower. So we do have to pay attention to, we don't technically have to insert keyframes at each position, but what will happen is periodically we will get weird timing that happens because we will forget, we will think we're going from one pose to another, and we'll get some odd timing happening. So it is generally in most cases going to be preferred, especially if you set things up, is to go back and we just hit F6, hit F6, and that's going to prevent any unexpected things from happening. Now, if at this point we've only been looking at motion keyframes are signified, we can add or subtract a motion keyframe with the motion keyframe indicator. We have the stop motion keyframe, which behaves a little bit differently. So each one of these we can see movement is happening. So from this point, as the motion unfolds, I'm going to go through and create a little action. So if I want to switch limbs I'm working on, I just hit escape. And now with this, I want to select the master peg and I want to rotate the whole character. I'm going to turn on onion skinning so I can get the character with translate back. So now getting the character back, hit escape. I can click on this leg, rotate that body so we can now see from this rotation. Now at this point, what we can do is insert a stop motion keyframe. So if I look at that with a motion keyframe, you see how that arm rotates up. But if I want the arm just to snap to that new position, what I can do is find that layer, and that is going to be my left arm right here. And if I declare that this is a stop motion keyframe, you'll see the line, the tween line, disappeared between it. So now it just jumps. If we turn off keyframe or onion skinning, it becomes even more apparent. Now what we can also do is introduce a little bit of drawing substitution. And to do that, if I go to that layer and go into the library, I will notice that this particular layer does have a few extra parts associated with it. So I can now substitute and change what is there to that hand or to this hand. So we have these alternative hands I can work with. I also, at some point, if I wanted, I could find the mouth layer. The mouth has a number of different mouth shapes because the mouth is set up for lip syncing. So knowing that, we can see how I can change which drawing is exposed, and then I can click back on the mouth and choose a different mouth. The names on these mouth shapes corresponds to specific naming requirements in Harmony to allow for automated lip syncing. They do not correspond to any particular sound that the mouth is making. So again, working with the layers, we work with our keyframes. We position and move. We can do drawing substitutions. Drawing substitutions are very snappy. If you want to have a more organic drawing change, then you need more drawings. Just like doing any other frame-by-frame animation. But for doing cutout style animation where we need to swap mouths, swap eyes, swap hands, swap feet, you could have a flat foot, a foot with a bend at the toe. All of these are possibilities as you are working with your animation.